I stand with England. I've always been a traditional supporter of England. I think they've done well to reach the semi-finals. Previously, I think the last two World Cup, big disappointment for them. The team that was led by Rooney then. Lots of expectations, but I think they underperformed. This year is a World Cup where people say in Swahili, "Sio ya mama ya mtu." So I will not be surprised if, with all the expectations about France now being, having one hand on the cup, ends up losing to either England or Croatia. But France has shown up that they have what it takes to win this World Cup. But there's been lots of surprises in this World Cup, so I'll keep an open mind.
Anything could happen. Yeah. But of course, France versus England sounds juicier than France versus Croatia at the finals.
It does, for historical reasons. In England, they always say, the football is finally coming home. So you can be sure that the English fans will be thronging into Russia in their numbers. The support levels and the noise in the stadium will be in high volumes and very animated. But you know what? France has a compact team, so it will be World Cup and its origins and the history versus a very compact and technical, well-talented France.
And of course, because of obvious reasons, the continent of Africa is, well, to a great percent behind France.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, after Senegal, Nigeria, and our other teams were bundled out, I think people look at France as the
only African team left.
the brothers from the other mother.
Yes.
So we can relate more with them.
Yes.
I was supporting myself Belgium for obvious reasons that a lot of my Man U players, Lukaku, he was a big disappointment yesterday. Fellaini really tried, but I supported Belgium for those reasons,
But you still have Pogba now, and let's see how it goes. Yes. Of course, the second semi-final of the World Cup in Russia will be played out today. England versus Croatia. What's your prediction? Let's now come back to what's happening in Kenya within our borders, and of course the biggest discussion has to do with schools unrest. How exactly it's being handled. The headlines, it is on page 2 of the Daily Nation. Back stops with teachers on student unrest. Only one headline, according to the Daily Nation this morning. Cabinet Secretary says parents will have to pay for the repair of property destroyed during chaos. On the Standard, the story has been covered on page 4. Two headlines. You will sit exam under trees, rioting students warned. That's according to Professor Magoha, the chairperson of the National Examinations Council. The council says despite cases of arson in schools, preparations for KCSE and KCP are complete. NEC asks school heads not to rush students to complete syllabus. And again, the second headline, school face to open, over 9 million shilling fine on parents for damages. And that's where I want us to start off, because yes, according to CS Amina, of course, there'll be some penalties for students. They could be jailed, they'll be arraigned, arsonists for that matter. Plus, if at all any student is caught for any of these misdemeanor or criminal offenses, that will be captured on their final leaving certificates from school. They'll be denied entry to university. And of course, the parents will have to pay for this. And that is where we start. 9 million shillings. The reopening of Kisumu Girls High School was pushed to next week because of a stalemate over a 9 million shilling fine. And this is a burden on parents. Yes. And we're seeing even the kind of statement released by CS Amina, the fact that students will not be allowed into university, that their leaving certificates will capture the fact that they were involved in these arson attacks. But it all goes back to the parent. It appears if you as a parent, your child is denied entry to university, it is still a burden to you at the end of the day. For the Form 1 student who's being told right now that you'll be denied entry to the university, it probably doesn't really matter at this point in their life. This is down to the parents.
Yes, it's down to the parents, and in two ways, not just the financial burden. Of course, our children bear a lot of responsibility in terms of how they need to carry out themselves, but how do we play our role as parents in terms of upbringing? We hear a lot about how parents have given up the space and the role of tutoring their children, instilling morals and discipline to their children, and we've given up this to the to the schools. And in church, in church where I go, there are stories about children being brought by their parents, taken to Sunday school, and the dad either sits in the car with the newspaper or drives off and comes back at the time when the church is over. So I think there's a real need for introspection, whether as parents we have failed or left that gap open, so that children are looking up to peer pressure, social media and other influences that really determines the direction in which they play. But in the end, schools must run. I mean, 10 dormitories in a couple of hours, in a couple of days really is crazy, and some message has to be sent. We could take isolated incidences. When you hear a school is banned, there is rape case, there is what. But 10 schools getting banned. If we don't do something about this, the bug is going to catch to the rest of the nation.
Yes. And of course, this has really affected one region more than the others. We're not saying other schools, other areas have not been affected. But let's be honest, the Nyanza region, most of the schools come from one region. What do you think could be the peculiar problem with this?
The frustration could come from one number of things. I think stress levels. I've been a member of a board in one or two schools, and the very basic thing that I think cuts across from the points I've had is that there is too much pressure on the kids in terms of how much they need to do in terms of cuts.
And that's unique to one region, because I'm asking why it appears that one region is probably more affected than the others.
Yes, I'm coming to that. The reason this could be effective in Nyanza is very difficult to unveil and very unfortunate. And I think a lot of investigations need to be done into this. But I suspect that children talk to themselves in between one school and a couple of students. In this very age, this digital age, I suspect that students are colluding from one school to the other and saying, let's do this together, so that, you know, it's not a collective, I mean, an individual school thing. So I suspect there is peer pressure, peer influence that is happening. Why it would happen in Nyanza and not in other schools is a very difficult thing to... but I don't know, given the levels of development, and I'm not saying that Nyanza is way behind other places, Northeastern and other places should make more complaints. I don't know whether lack of facilities and lack of proper amenities would affect Nyanza more than it would affect Central or Coast or other schools.
And the latest update we have from that region is that overnight, at least, Thurdibuoro Secondary School in Kisumu's Nyakach sub-county, one dormitory was torched yesterday. That's we got this update as of midnight.
That would make it 11 schools now?
This is the 11th in one region. And that's why we're asking what could be the peculiar or probably the unique issue with that area. This is Thurdibuoro Secondary School in Kisumu's Nyakach sub-county. Our panel just grew bigger even as we continue discussing this. Joy Mdivo, an advocate of the High Court, also a social and political commentator, has joined the panel. Good morning, karibu sana.
Thank you.
And Isaac Maura, it's good to have you in studio. It's been a while. I haven't hosted you. Nominated Senator, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Yes, we're just discussing issues to do with the schools and rest. It is the biggest discussion this whole week and in the, over the past few weeks. Back stops the teachers on student unrest. That's a headline on page 2 of the Daily Nation. PS Bello Kipsang calls for joint efforts to curb raging chaos, says complacency will worsen the situation. On page 4 of the Standard, you will sit exam under trees, writing students warned, and this warning came straight from the chair of the NEC. This is National Examinations Council, Professor George Magoha. But we've chosen to start off with the other headline, where school fails to open over 9 million shilling fine on parents for damages. This is Kisumu Girls High School. The reopening was set for yesterday, but it has been pushed to next week because of a stalemate of a 9 million shilling fine. The school was closed a week ago after students went on the rampage. They were expected to report back yesterday. Each of the over 1,800 students were required to pay a fine of 5,000 shillings for the damage caused during the July protests. And we are saying the burden simply goes back to the parents. That yes, The students have done all this. Even according to the CS, the kind of punishments or penalties that she listed, the fact that the students will be denied entry into public universities, the fact that leaving certificates will indicate that they were involved in such arson, even that still ends up being a burden to the parent. Joy, is it intended to actually to ensure that the parents feel the pinch, probably because they've neglected their roles?
If you break, you pay. That's the rule. If I'm walking with my child down the supermarket aisle, the Luminac aisle, and he goes doing sharara and all this, the plates fall, they'll just count for me how many plates my child has broken, and I will have to pay. Why is that? Because the primary responsibility to ensure that your child is disciplined and that your child respects other people's property starts at home. You teach your children to be responsible and to respect other people's property, even if you're aggrieved, to walk away and find a way of letting us help you and not being destructive. That's the primary responsibility of the parent. So if your child is involved in acts of arson, you ought to make reparations for the loss that has been incurred, because somebody invested to put that infrastructure in place. So because your child has no income, you as a parent must fess up. The bit that I have a departure from is when you decide that this forms a permanent record in the children's criminal itinerary, such that it blocks your future development in terms of looking for university education or even employment. Why am I saying that? Let's look at similar fact evidence. If you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. In the United States, they do have a system where a blight in your youth can still affect you 25 years onwards. And what that does, it has systematically entrenched a defranchisement of a certain segment of the society that was more prone. So like if you grew up in an area where there's a lot of gang violence and you got recruited when you're 12, and you did something when you're 17, 18, and you got into the system, even when you're a 35-year-old man, you've straightened your life out, you have children, you'll still find you have bad credit, you're an ex-con, there are some jobs you'll not be able to get simply because of something you did in your foolish years. Teenage years are they are full of the hubris of youth.
I like your description, foolish years, because a Form 1 student may not really understand what impact that it will have, that his leaving certificate will indicate that he was involved in a case of arson at the age of 14.
And it actually is a mark of it's one of those things, it's a mark of pride amongst your peers that I was involved in the strike. But when you're now trying to get into law school and you're told, by the way, oh, you can't run for office, because that's the point at which I'm saying, okay, that doesn't make any sense. You don't want to punish people eternally. You want people to learn their lessons. So on that point, there is a point of departure as far as I'm concerned. But for parents to pay up for damage caused by their children, they ought to, because otherwise keep your children at home and let them be day scholars.
But Isaac Mora, do you think we've chosen the right path in saying that you'll be punished in future, that for something you've done at the age of 14, that you wait until you turn 18 and you will see the punishment? Don't you think that a more immediate penalty would be better, that for a 14-year-old, immediate punishment would be a better deterrent than telling them that, by the time you turn 18, you'll not be able to go to university?
I think if God kept all this, a score of all the things we've done in this world, nobody would ever go to heaven. Because suddenly we really, human is to error. And as Joy has said, the whole issue around young people and teenagers, where you are confused whether you are a child or an adult, is difficult. I mean, dealing with teenagers, dealing with youth, even in employment, leave alone high school. In employment, young people have what we call the era of judgment. They don't know how to make decisions that are beneficial to them, and sometimes they just get the excitement of the moment. Yesterday we had a very good meeting at the Kenya Young Parliamentarian Association with the university students. And you know, these are leaders, but you could tell that you need to give opportunity to people to grow. So certainly there is a consistency around these strikes. It is because of the mocks. It is because of the looming KCSE exam. It always happens around this time because people feel unprepared, so they have to find a reason so that maybe they can defer the pressure. And that is really an indictment of the teachers, that sometimes students don't feel well prepared. And now that we no longer have the people, people hawking grades, because Matiang'i sorted that out, where you could pay 30,000 shillings to get an A, then people must really perform. And I think this is something that we need to look at. But what I find interesting is the fact that before people used to strike here, but they never used to burn their dormitories. They never used to burn their properties. So I think the parents, unfortunately, it's also an indictment on us as parents, because it means that our children have become more indisciplined.
Yes.
And we have to take action. We have to take action. Spoil the road, spare the road, spoil the child.
Exactly.
Yeah, there must be some. Don't just make it a responsibility of teachers alone.
Yes.
And by the way, Fred, before I leave, there is a child who has died at St. Oda Oluoch School for the Blind, Frederick Okoth. This child, in mysterious circumstances, he was found thrown in a borehole. This is a school for the blind. I mean, this matter must be investigated. Okay. There is no way you can just have a little child, 10-year-old. I mean, that borehole has been there forever. How comes it this time that he has just died mysteriously? Okay, and I'll pass on that information to our news desk so that you can see if it can be followed up for our subsequent bulletins. Back to the issue of schools unrest, and the senator just pointed out the issue of spare the road, spoil the child. Yes, student unrest was there even when you were in school, but it was not as destructive as today. Of course, the mode of parenting, how children are treated in school has changed. Do you think, and Honorable Oluoch, in Parliament, would you advocate for return of corporal punishment in school? Back to the same issue, an immediate punishment to students, instead of telling them that by the time you turn 18, that's when you'll feel the consequences. Don't you think that immediate punishment there would actually act as a deterrent, that students would not go as far as destroying school property?
I don't think so. The reason we removed corporal punishment was because it was subject to a lot of abuse. We've seen lots of children, even after we banned it, being subjected to life-threatening situations as a result of corporal punishment. I think what needs to be done is that we need to intensify the discipline that we do at the different levels, and this thing cannot be achieved as a simple. We need to do it as parents, we need to do it in churches. In school, we need to spend a little bit more time allowing children to play and engage in other activities. I think we've invested too much as a society into this meritocratic situation where if you don't get an A, you're a failure. You get you're in D and other ninis, your life is gone. I think we need to rethink our education system and allow our children to be able to also do other things and still consider themselves successful. I think right now from grade 3, I see my daughter, they're being inducted into this new system where cumulatively what you do from the lower classes determines your grade, as opposed to these 2 hours of an English or mathematics paper, which could go either way if situations were different. So I think we need to relook how we are carrying out our education system. But if you ask me, I think it would be a very bad idea for us to be able to introduce corporal punishment. Perhaps some other forms of punishment that is immediate, that sitting out, like you do your children, go to that naughty corner, and sometimes they really get...
Does it work?
It does work. Let me tell you what I did with my little boy one time, and it really brought some sense into his mind. He was playing around in front of people's knees and bringing up soil from the garden, and so people really got incensed, and we had this was up, and it wasn't only my boy. So what I did, there are leaves that fall on the compound in the apartment area, and I called all of them and I said, what happened? And they pointed out to me everybody who was messing up. So I can't discipline other kids, so I told my son, come here, pick up the broom, and you're going to clean for us the entire compound. He was so embarrassed. And the other kids sat there and, and watched. I never saw him do any kind of this. So we need to put this in our schools as well, get people to sit out, go perhaps and clean a whole dormitory. Some other, you need to be innovative around it, but corporal punishment, I think that would be no. One more thing that I needed to add about this incident, and I'm seeing parents raising this, whether indeed it is possible that these fines are being used by some schools to make money. I know we need that immediate punishment. We need to repair the dorms. The parents need to feel some pinch. But are there situations we need to investigate about the schools making money because some things they're raising here? We don't have a final report. Can you also select who had a higher responsibility? What if in a school of 300, the masterminds were about 10 or 20? Shouldn't we have some differential sort of punishment?
9 million shillings for repairing however many dormitories is still a lot of money.
Yes.
But on this issue of corporal punishment, are you among those who feel that probably we should even consider, should we be having that conversation whether or not to reintroduce it?
We should. I'm of a slightly different opinion as my learned senior, not because I agree there was a lot of abuse with corporal punishment, but as a deterrent, especially for young children, it's a very powerful deterrent. Now me, I'm speaking from experience.
Yes.
There are some things I did not do in school, not because I understood the system, not because I understood what was, because I knew if I did it, I would get 6 of the best. And that in itself kept me on the straight and narrow. Yes. But when I got to high school, the value of the cane was a lot less. Because by then I could absorb some pain, I could absorb some punishment. Yeah. But in primary school, especially when you're in lower primary, there's a lot of, like you say, naughtiness, that sometimes it's only the kiboko that makes sense. The problem is also with our style of parenting, because what Mweshimwe is talking about, the naughty corner and these other things, work if you're consistent in your follow-through. With us as Africans, I think we haven't learned to use that as a discipline.
Parents are lost on how to discipline their own children.
Exactly. So if I tell my child sit in the naughty corner and refuses to sit, default position is back to the pinch and the kiboko. We still haven't learned how to use those alternative means effectively, and that is why now we have a generation where the children are having a lot of they're testing us and pushing the boundaries. What we see, for example, with the children in high school now is this sense of entitlement, because we have brought up our children telling them, you know what, tell the house girl, watoto wangu lazima wale mayai, give them whatever they want. Tell them, daddy, mommy, don't bother with housework, don't bother. We want you to study because we want you to do well. So you hire enough people to do everything for the children. So by the time they're going to high school, they already have that sense of you're a little king, you're a little queen. Then all of a sudden you make your own bed, you do your own laundry. Even for the child, it's a little bit of a culture shock. Yes. Maybe we need to re-evaluate. In fact, in my opinion, one of the things that should become almost compulsory is a parenting curriculum of some sort. Because as Moshimio pointed out, we have left parenting to teachers almost. I'm paying you fees, here is my child, tell me when they're closing. And that's it. And we have a generation that is growing up like weeds. They're raising themselves, and it's not doing them any favors. And ask us, those who are actually hiring some of these millennials, it's a mismatch. Our work ethic, their work ethic does not match. It's totally different. Yes.
Senator, do you think this is a conversation that we should probably have, even at parliamentary level, that the way we discipline students has changed? Probably even at parliamentary level, that what are the other forms of discipline that are allowed? Because, okay, fine, corporal punishment, there are those who are against it, but surely there should be a standardized form of punishment in schools so that it can work.
Yeah, I think we have to discipline our children. It has been proven over the years that is the way to go. Only that we need to make sure that it is not abused, so that you don't have a teacher who is stressed to come and meet it out on some small little child just because they did a small thing. We've even seen, remember there are cases even where some parent actually burnt the hands of the child because they had taken some 10 shillings. So I think that is not even, should not be confused for punishment. That is just somebody who is having some mental problems. So that then we don't give a bad name to an otherwise good way of controlling, the behaviors of society. Because, Fred, if you go to the West, children are so indisciplined. I would hate to imagine that we could go that direction.
Don't you think we're already down that path?
Yes, we are, because people are watching on TV. In fact, nowadays, if you are to shout at a child to stop doing something, as a father, they may as well ask you what is wrong with your voice. Because they are just wondering whether you are croaking or you are, so we have really lost our value systems, and it is because of the way we are becoming more and more modern. But the consequences, we are seeing them in our offices. These millennials, as Joy is saying, They cannot even write a simple letter because they are just on WhatsApp, they are on social media, they are on Snapchat, whatever they are doing. And so our productivity is going very low. You see, you have, you know, we are becoming victims of our own prosperity and advancement. So it's something that we need to engage in. We need to actually agree, you know, being directed by child psychologists, to know how is it that children would appreciate what forms of discipline. But to just say you'll just call a child and counsel them and give them a good word of advice, sometimes it doesn't make sense, really. There's a reason why all of us are told if we keep on sinning, we'll go to hell, you know, so that then we can know that finally we are accountable. And let us not try to, you know, play around with the issue around everything has a consequence. You know, if we rear a society that is indisciplined, it means that also our country cannot move forward.
Would you support the reintroduction of corporal punishment in schools?
Maybe the word is not corporal, maybe punishment, because corporal may sound a bit harsh. We need to discuss how to go about it. You see, but caning, for me, I agree with it.
Yeah. Caning should be reintroduced.
Caning is important. It is important because I remember when we used to be in primary school, and you know that if you don't do your homework, the teacher will cane you. Then you had to do it. Now, if you have to give stories about how you are watching cartoons on TV and watching the Kardashians, I don't know whether that would also help. Anyway, we need to discuss about it.
Should we reintroduce caning in schools as a form of deterrent to the kind of indiscipline we are witnessing right now? That's a big discussion, and probably that's where it should be going, because yes, what's happening should be put to a stop, and the parents, as it is right now, are bearing the brunt of all these things. 9 million shillings, that's just one example. Kisumu Girls High School, all the parents have to pay 5,000 shillings for their students, whether or not that student took part in that assault